Welcome to In the Know. We have a special guest here with us today. We got Andrew Stevens of Sports Drink. Um, we have a lot to cover. The Pelicans have won a lot of games, lost one game here against the Warriors, and the West is crazy as ever. So we have a lot to get down to. But first, you know the deal. We got the amazing intro we got to play. This podcast is brought to you by Birdsall Law Firm, the official injury lawyers of Boot Crew Media, located at 918 Poydras Street by the Superdome. Give them a call at 504-523-5413. If you or someone you know has been involved in an accident, make sure to mention we sent you. Birdsall Law Firm, the official injury lawyers of Boot Crew Media. Ironically, fellas, one of the kids I coach got hit by a car while he was biking. So I coach Tulane Ultimate Frisbee, and he's biking across Claiborne. And I guess some Uber driver just like wasn't looking where he was going and hit him. Everything's fine, like for the most part, right? I don't think he's going to be able to play this season again, so that sucks. But like thankfully he's not like seriously injured. He can still like walk, and nothing's broken and all of that. But all that to say that I recommended Birdsall Law Firm to him. Don't know if he actually went through, but yeah, if you or someone you know has been injured,
call. I love that you call them kids, and like, oh no, they're actually college students. You're making yourself out to be more of an old man than you actually are. On that.
Actually, the funniest thing is he's not even a kid. He's like our resident like super senior. So he was in the military. And so he did his service first. And then, so he's like basically my age. And so I just have a bad habit of calling them kids.
No one in the city of New Orleans can say healthy, it appears. Just nobody wants it enough.
Nobody wants it enough. Joining us today, Andrew, fresh off of filming Kevin McHale for Winning Time in HBO. What's up, Andrew? How you been, man?
Doing well. I'm excited to be back in New Orleans. We had a funny thing while I was in LA, which was, I think, right when I left for the first time. We went on that huge winning streak where we destroyed the Nuggets, and when BI was out and Zion was carrying us. And so there was, I think, a large part of the Pels fan base that unceremoniously welcomed me home, because once I got back, things went in the toilet.
Yeah, probably should not have made your way back on that one. That reminds me of Cancun Chris and when that happened.
That was the same trajectory after my daughter was born. the Pelicans were the number one seed in the conference when she was born, and then the very first game I think was the New Year's Eve, the loss to Philly, and then things were teetered down from there, obviously. So we're in the same trajectory there.
Yeah. Speaking of trajectories, the Pelicans, they are 5 of their last 6. Technically, what that stat really means is they're 5 of their last 7. But they are 5 of their last 6. They won 5 in a row after a rather embarrassing loss to Houston. They seem to put together a really good stretch of basketball, which seemed like everyone is having fun. Now, mind you, the quality of teams they played was not very good. The best team they played out of there was a Clippers team on the road, which, in my opinion, was a really impressive win.
Are we sure about that, though? Are we sure that was the best team? Because Charlotte,
you're right. You're right. Now that Charlotte's beaten the Mavs twice, maybe we have to reevaluate that.
And the Thunder 2 days ago.
Yeah. That is, Charlotte's a sneaky team, man, and I really do wonder what they're gonna do this summer. But that being aside, back to the Pelicans. The winning on the road is tough, and they went and won in Portland. They went and won in Los Angeles. They weren't able to pull it off against the Warriors. Was a close game until the Warriors did a very classic third quarter bull rush, and the Pelicans on the second out of a back-to-back just couldn't handle the avalanche of threes made and all of that. But I guess all that to say, let me ask Andrew first, and I'll go to Mason. Do you feel that this team is like truly turned a corner? And do you feel comfortable about like, okay, like, hey, they put together, 5 good games of basketball. Yeah, they kind of didn't really like perform that well against the Warriors, but there's something to build off of here, and they can perhaps take this down the home stretch.
So I think, God forbid, I'm going to try and impart a little bit of nuance, which I know is often rough at the end of NBA seasons. But I don't think it's like they've turned the corner. I think that the end of the season, just when you have this few games, it is about stacking the number of wins you can get. And I know it's been this way for the last 2 seasons with us, but stack enough wins to get into the play-in to hopefully get Zion back. And I know that like we are all just sort of bated breath waiting on this injury news, but the team that I saw prior to in that LA game, the Rockets game before that, it was a team that like seemed so far beyond the pale that even Zion healthy or a ramped up Zion wasn't going to be able to fix. But it now seems like a team where you can plug in a guy who has played 30, 40 games this year and then potentially take somebody on in the playoffs if you can get out through these next 7 or so games, get in through the play-in, and then actually get to the 7 or 8 seed. And so I think that like, have they quote unquote like this team as it's currently constructed, I don't think has any chance of winning a playoff series, but I do think that it is good enough to potentially get you to the 7 seed so you can then get 2 cracks at the play-in and then give Z another 3-4 weeks to get back to health before hopefully a bigger series against somebody else.
Now when you talk about that playoff series, like do you think that's with like a fully ramped up Z, like you're still not comfortable with them in a playoff series there?
Oh no, I'd be like I'm an idiot, and so I genuinely think that this team could win the West if Zion is healthy. Like there's not like I have to that version of it's hard to even speak on this team right now is fully healthy because we've seen it for 9 games. But even like that version that we were talking about pre-show with Zion, or maybe it was during the show, with Zion against Denver and how he was playing on that win streak without BI, like that is a top 7-8 player in the NBA. The way he was rotating, the way that the defense was working, the way that just he was opening up stuff for JV. Like, I think that is a team that legitimately could give anybody a run. Now, it's going to be such a limited sample size because you're going to have 6 or 7 games. But like going and playing Denver, if we were actually fully healthy, I wouldn't write us off at all.
Mason, what about you?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm a little bit more pessimistic just because and this was Stan Van Gundy talked about this in the Warriors game, is that there's a reintegration period that has to happen. And if you're trying to do that on the fly, like best case scenario is he's back for the last 2 games of the year, right? And even that, I feel like they're tap dancing around that possibility. And so if you assume game 1 back is like the play-in, it's a lot to figure out on the fly. And so I guess I need the team without Zion to convince me that they can do this against good defenses before I give any thought to them getting out of the play-in. Because like that's where I think I'm less concerned with taking those games on the road, which is probably irrational of me. I mean, I think they've shown that if they play the right way, they can win home or away. It's just more about making sure
Have you seen their road record?
Oh, it's bad. But I mean, like even
the David Grubb stat.
But even but even recently, I feel like they've shown the ability. Like I mean, that game that Clippers one was a big one, and so I think they've shown the ability. If they're playing the right way, I still think they can win anywhere. And so, but that I still got to be convinced. I don't think that I haven't seen this enough. And I guess kind of like there's a correlation here, because if the Pelicans are able to get into the play-in or 7 or 8 seed, that should imply that they've started to figure this out against teams that actually are worth a shit, you know? And so if not, they're the 9 or 10 seed. I think they're in trouble. So we'll see.
Well, the Pelicans have started selling tickets for a home play-in game, so they're certainly preparing for that outcome.
Yeah.
I obviously a home playing game is better than no playing game or a road playing game, and I hope it's one of those. Hey, it's the 7th seed, so it's home no matter what outcome. But let's talk about reintegration. I think that's kind of been a big question for a lot of folks. What that's going to look like with Zion, and I guess let me voice my concerns with it, because I think you guys already touched on it a little bit, and I'll push it over to y'all. But historically, when we've seen Zion return from a prolonged injury, there's those dreaded burst minutes, right? Those return to play protocol burst minutes. And while I think, to be fair, we haven't seen the burst minutes since his rookie year, we have seen kind of like an unspoken like minutes restriction on it. And I think that's fine. I'm okay with that. Any star coming back's gonna have that, right? It will be a ramp up period. But two, usually what we see from him at least is a few games to get back into like game shape as well. And so what that primarily looks like offensively is a lot of him in the post, maybe more turnovers than usual as he's getting his wind up, as he's learning the speed of the game again. And then just defensively not having the effort or energy to be the kind of like difference maker that he was during the stretch where the Pelicans were winning a lot. So that's a big question for me is which version of Z are we getting? I think conservatively we can probably pencil in like it's not going to be the MVP caliber guy right away. I think that'd be an unreasonable expectation on anyone's part. But how long is it going to take if he's only back for the play-in game? Is it even worth putting him in the starting lineup, right? And changing everything up and trying to accommodate that? Or do you just kind of, because LeBron just came back from an extended absence and he came off the bench, right? So how do they do that? And two, if he is starting, then who's going to the bench? And I guess Mason, you had a little smirk there. What are your thoughts on that question?
I mean, I don't think that we can. I think the players off the table obviously are CJ and BI. I honestly think Herb Jones is off the table in Willie Green's mind. I don't think it should be off the table, but I think given everything we've seen from Willie Green this season, Herb Jones is not leaving the starting lineup. Because of what he gives the Pelicans on the defensive end. So then the question is, does he just rip the Band-Aid off and go start small, or does he do what we all are expecting him to do and bench Trey Murphy? And I think it's probably Trey, which I don't agree with. I would honestly, given how Jonas has been used just on the whole, even though it changed a little bit over the last few, it did change materially in the last few games. I'm still not buying that it's a trend that's going to continue in the future. And look, that was a bad matchup for him in the Warriors game. So I'm not using that one game as evidence against that point, but I still think we got to see it more consistently against teams he does make sense for. But generally speaking, I think I would of the options that I think are being considered for Willie, I would bench Jonas and just go small. I think ultimately the best move would be bring Herb off the bench and just use, because you got to score. You got to score in the playoffs, and I think that's the move I would make, and then you can get creative with rotations from there and making sure that you're not dealing with a situation where the bench unit is a bunch of defensive guys who can't score, because you got to avoid that. Jonas can help with that, but I think to close it out. Yeah, I think I hope Willie decides to bench Jonas. I think he will bench Trey.
Yeah, there was a good stat that we were talking about. I guess it was Schmidt and I write on Twitter before this, but somebody, Ryan Bernardoni, he said teams that make more threes than their opponents this season are 714 and 345, which is like almost a 60 win pace. And I think that just the fact, like, somebody responded to that saying that Willie prioritizes limiting opponents' threes, not getting up threes of his own, which is like, on this one hand, it weirdly acknowledges that the problem is you need to be creating more 3-point attempts, but then you're not rectifying it on half of the basketball court where you can affect those things. And so, like, there is this weird, like, why can't you piece the logic from the defensive side onto the offensive side? But I do think the perfect, like, microcosm or philosophy of Willie Green is going to be a guy who limits opponents' threes in the starting lineup and removing the guy who can actually get up 10 or 12 a game from the starting lineup. And again, I'm not an NBA coach. We certainly have our disagreements on how to operate that. But I just think that if we're wondering who's going to go to the bench, it's probably going to be Trey. But I also think that to lead into there, that little Haynes thing, he said something along the lines of like, and how's Willie Green going to end up managing that? And I know it's sort of filler thing that you say, but it might be something that we're not privy to, of like Zion coming back in bursts could be hell to try and integrate.
Yeah. I think, and the one thing I'll say in Willie Green's defense is that he probably acknowledges, like we do, the fact that this team doesn't have that many shooters. And so if you don't have enough guys who can get up a bunch of threes and be confident in it, then yeah, I understand. The least you want to do is limit on the other end, but don't bench the guy, one of the few guys who can get those shots up, like you're saying. It's just, I really hope he doesn't do that.
To the person who says that Willie Green prioritizes in limiting opponent threes, the Pelicans are 25th in opponent 3-point frequency. So not doing a great job of running people off the line per se. And
we're such a good rim protecting team. That's why.
They do actually, the Pelicans have been good all year at keeping players out of the paint and away from the rim. So that is their form of rim protection, is they don't let you get there. But when you do, might as well just dunk it. But so I think both of you are, I guess, in agreement. And I agree with what you're saying is Trey needs to stay in the starting lineup. I mean, I think it's something I've certainly said all year, like before the season started, Trey should be a starter. They should close with him. And I think that hasn't changed. And I think the way he's played this March, where he's averaging just under 19 points a game on just very blistering shooting percentage, downright been one of the most efficient players in the league actually all year. Just to sport a season long like true shooting percentage of 65% is completely bonkers when you think about it, especially for a second year player. And so now that Devontae is gone, there really isn't a guy that is comfortable or happy taking these threes. CJ will do it, right? And it's been kind of like part of his skill set throughout his career. He obviously very prefers the mid-range. Brandon will have his games, but again, prefers the mid-range. There's not a guy on the team like Trey who's been comfortable or happy taking these threes. And not only is he comfortable and happy, he makes them at a very, very high rate. And during this March, I think, Andrew, as you said, he's averaging almost 10 attempts a game. And to take that kind of 3-point frequency off the court and introduce another non-shooter, and not just a non-shooter, a guy just that doesn't shoot, right? He's the paint king. And we don't want him shooting threes. We don't want him spacing the floor, but we do want guys spacing the floor for him. And I think it'll be a mistake, but we all kind of see where this is coming. And I think for the long-term future of this team, like Trey also needs to start like next year. But we don't know what the roster is going to look like. And I'm sure they'll try to shape it in a way that makes sense to them. Maybe it might not make sense to us. We'll see, TBD. But Mason, you brought up like just starting Z at the 5 or Herb at the 5. And I guess I'm a little bit scared to do that with Z just coming off of his injury the way he has. If this was the Zion of December heading into January, I would have been more for it, right? And in fact, like I would have been like, okay, well, if you want to find a way to keep more defense on the court, just start Larry next to Z, right? It should just be CJ, Trey, BI, Larry, and Z. But hey, I just think that at this point, you don't want to put that kind of a defensive burden on Z. I think they're going to put him in space, and we all know what an out of shape Zion looks like defending on an island, and those highlights end up everywhere. Well, I don't think that's something we want to replicate.
Well, we'll see. I guess I could make the argument that Zion at the 5 reduces the toll on him from a stamina perspective. I think obviously like you need to be. It's like the opposite of the Anthony Davis situation where like AD didn't want to guard play the 5 because he didn't want to bang with folks down low. If you think about Zion's specific injury, the hamstring, I guess I could see the benefits in him playing the 5 and not having to run around as much defensively. So I don't know. I mean, I could see it both ways with just in that respect.
In a weird way, I almost like. And again, I remember Kelly Olynyk relentlessly cooking a non-in-shape Zion at the beginning of the season. And so this is like, we definitely have evidence to this, but like in a weird way, I would feel more confident playing Denver and starting Z at the 5, because if you're going to end up running a lot of specific pick and rolls for Jokic, having Zion start off as the Jokic defender, and then you can switch a Dyson or a Herb or somebody who can potentially provide a second or two of contest for a guy like Jokic, as opposed to Memphis is going to be Steven Adams, heavy high screen and roll on Ja, and then you have Zion in space against Ja, which seems like a nightmare. And so, like, I know there's not a good answer, but if those are the two matchups that you're looking at, in a weird way, I would rather play Denver.
Yeah, no, I think Denver is certainly the less talented defensive team. So, and given the Pelicans' strength as a paint-oriented team, and their lack of rim protectors and perimeter defenders, that certainly seems like a matchup they should prefer. But I mean, that would mean locking in the 8th seed tentatively. I think Denver's going to run away and win the West here. But have they clinched it yet?
They might be close. One quick thing too about just with like, I think the way that Zion affects the game too is like, I mean, just the Pelicans' deficiency being like such a bad transition defensive team. Like we've talked about this before on Twitter, Schmidt, just where Zion is so good on the offensive half court of slowing down the ball that like there is a weird intangible. I know it's shown in some of the sort of per 100 possessions and some of the metric rate stats, but like it's really hard to quantify how much he's allowed to slow your defense down to where it makes somebody else beat you in the half court. And I think that that's where sort of my irrational confidence comes in Zion, is that like he just can help you bring the flow of the game back to what you want, to where you can at least set your defense up. And you might end up getting cooked in the half court, but it gives you more of a puncher's chance to withstand these like Warriors third quarter type avalanches where like quick miss shot, they're getting and going, open three, even if they miss the three, Looney's there for a rebound and it sort of starts the system over again.
Yeah, I've got it's interesting. I missed that conversation, but I had a theory when the Pelicans were just dropping all these games that maybe it was after the Lakers game, that when as a player, if you're like one of the guys sharing the floor with BI and CJ, if you just see them going kind of ISO after ISO possession, you just feel phased out of the offense. How motivated are you to just sprint back on defense when they break a mid-range jumper or even at like? And I'm not I feel like there is a, like you call it intangible with Zion. I think there's another like equally like intangible aspect of this where like you just get like the team that we saw last year to the end of the season or even start of this year. You're even like if BI and CJ are making buckets, then we're winning and we're winning. Like I'm happier to just bust my ass and get back on defense. If I feel like I could be helping the team and we're not succeeding and people are missing shots, then it's a little demotivating, right? So, I don't know what, the data supports that, but it just kind of, I've been wondering that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if there's any like way to like actually quantify that, but we see it with JV, right? We've seen his engagement levels go up, and now Willie Green even commented on it during his post-game presser. And, it was like, this is a guy when he's involved will give a lot back to you. And I think every player, every human is that way. And but yeah, like Z is one of those players that just puts so much pressure on the rim that defenses have to collapse, and they're already in a position to like maybe not leak out, right? And the other part is if he's missing, he's gonna grab his own rebound, and you got to put 2 or 3 people. Otherwise, that's just another a second chance opportunity for the Pelicans. And which is why historically, like, I don't know if the stats still bear out this season. I'll have to do like some digging, and I'm sure they do. But like a Zion layup attempt has been one of the league's best transition defenses. Just the fact that he can get one up and do that. It's pretty nutty to think about.
Well,
I guess let's. Sorry.
Oh yeah,
go
sorry.
For it.
No, sorry. Just my last sort of small point is just that there was that piece of data that came out too that was basically like, and obviously makes sense based on how open things are in transition, layups and threes and whatnot, but like the offense precipitously declines each second you get further down the shot clock. And so just by a nature of making a team dribble the ball up the court for 5 seconds, you're going to slow down a lot of those transition opportunities. And so like that just plays into like the effect that Zion can have on the offense and defensive side.
No, completely. I guess let's talk about this Warriors game for a brief bit. I don't want to spend like too long on it. I think I will say like it's probably not great to like overreact based off of like one game. In my opinion, so they had a good first half. The second half, they got blitzed. In my opinion, even in the first half, they didn't look very great from an eye test perspective. Their half court offense just looked like it was struggling to generate anything of quality. And what really allowed them to get out to the lead that they had was the Warriors being completely careless with the ball. And so my question to you all is do you think what transpired during that game is just one of those things where okay, they're coming off a back-to-back, and this is a tough team that's really good at home, and it's just one of those things where okay, the Pels personnel didn't match up from a shooting perspective. They don't really have any shooters that they can put out there, and B, hey, this is when they met this adversity, it's a one-off relapse? Or do you think it's more endemic of every time they're going to face a good team, this is just kind of who they're going to revert back to? I guess we can go with Andrew first.
Oh, okay. So I mean, yes. Do I sort of, just based on my history as 20 years of a New Orleans sports fan, do I pencil in road losses to good teams? Yeah. I mean, it's just sort of something that I've had to get used to. But I think for that specific Warriors team, I think that there is a little bit of playing dead that they've done this year. I do think just when you win 4 championships, I mean, Draymond's he's admitted it several times. You're not going to get up for a Tuesday game in Charlotte like you are, which is, I think, why it's fun playing in front of your crowd when they need to turn it on. I think them being able to turn it on is indicative of their home record. I think they had a long championship tour last year, and so they went 0-12 to start the season on the road. And I think that Warriors team, when it's all actually said and done, is probably better than where the 6 seed stands right now, especially when Steph is playing like that. And so that is it. But that's also a team, I know they're missing Wiggins, but that's a team that's a lot healthier than we are right now. And not to bring everything back to the Zion conversation, but and maybe this is a broader conversation, maybe not so much the minutia of last night, but it's just, it's not a team that I feel like I can get all that upset for what their current form is right now. Just because, like I've said, you take away Nikola Jokic, take away LeBron James, take away Kevin Durant, take away, I guess they play on the same team now, but I was going to say Devin Booker. But you take away any of those players and you take away the best player on any of those teams, and the team looks precipitously different. And I think for some reason, because of the way that the Pels played last year, we like to think that oh, we are this team that's scrappy and can fight without Zion, when it's sure, but it's maybe a 38-40 win team, maybe even less without him. And so it's I do think it is a team that is fun and capable, but not a team that has turned the corner in any way, still without Zion.
Yeah. On that point specifically, it gets a little frustrating, right? Because you look at, if you had told me that the Pelicans team, minus Zion, would be, top half of the league defensively, or top 10 defensively even, I would have said, wow, without Zion, they could probably win 45, 50 games, because look at all the offensive talent they've got on that team: Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, and Jonas. And so it is just kind of, it's very hard to kind of calibrate everything. And we've talked enough about coaching, I think, on prior podcasts. But regarding the Warriors game specifically, I mean, look, I assume, at least one of y'all were also at the 2015 Warriors game, when game 3, when I came in from Austin and surprised my mom for her birthday, was at that game, and the vibes were just great until they weren't, right? And so I'm just, whenever we play the Warriors, that's just my base. Like you mentioned, going on the road, not beating good teams. Just when we play the Warriors, my expectation is that they're going to make a comeback. And so, I'm a little numb to it at this point. It wasn't a playoff game, so I guess that's cool. But yeah, I mean, I think Schmidt, you were right when you called out that the offense wasn't exactly clicking. You were just generating a lot of live ball turnovers and doing well in transition. And so, look, I mean, they weren't up by 17 just because of that. I think they were doing a decent job of making shots, but you could feel they didn't get. I mentioned at halftime of the game, Clay seemed like an afterthought, and that seemed very strange to me, because if you've got Herb Jones kind of shadowing Curry, who's stopping Clay? I mean, that's and sure enough, he took 5 threes in the third quarter or something like that, and obviously Steph was Steph, and that was all she wrote. But yeah, it felt like the lead was not like it didn't feel like we were up by 17 because we were just playing solid basketball. We felt like we were up by 17 because the Warriors were doing dumb stuff. It was like they picked up right where they left off in the Timberwolves game. That was there was a very weird, strange ending for the Warriors there. But yeah, I think one thing, Schmidt, you I think you retweeted it today, the fact that 100% of Jonas's minutes were matched up with Steph Curry, like nonsensical. Like that, I mean, beyond just the fact that he wasn't having much success against Looney, and they were just kind of going through him in the post. Like it just seemed like all of Jonas's, like how they used Jonas and when they used Jonas just made no sense. And that was a little frustrating to me. I don't think that's why they lost this game, but it feels like they were inflicting additional pain upon themselves that they didn't have to do.
I think if anyone wants to be a nerd and chart out JV's minutes this season and how much they've overlapped with like the opposing star ball handler, and map that out, one, that'd be great. I'd forever thank you. But I think you'd find that it's been over like 90% in most of the cases. And so like, you know, I'm looking at guys like Luka and Shea and just guys that are just gonna get him into trouble. You know that JV's not gonna have a good time guarding them. But the other thing is that like when you match up his minutes like that, what you're conversely not doing is matching up minutes in areas that he can take advantage of, right? And that comes on the offensive side too, where there's been frequently moments where because of the substitution patterns, he hasn't been in the game where it would be a clear advantage to have him in the game against the opposing big man. So I think those are some of the things I'd like to see the staff clean up moving forward. And I think they've grown in these small areas a little bit as the year has went on. They used to not do things such as like, hey, it's the end of a half or end of a quarter. You have one offensive possession left. It's a dead ball. They used to just not sub in a shooter, right? And now they've started doing that. It's like, oh, you know, we got one possession in. Let's just get Trey out there, or let's get someone else out there. They used to not put their bigs at the free throw line to rebound when you know an offense-defensive substitution was about to happen at the end of the game. And it's like, no, just put your 3 7-footers out there. You know the other team's going to call a timeout immediately if you miss the free throw or something like that. So they've gotten better. I still think there's a little bit ways to go. And I'm curious to see, like, I think we've speculated on this podcast that there will be changes this summer to the coaching staff. I still believe that. I don't know, to what extent. I don't think Willie Green is in danger of his job, contrary to, angry people on Twitter, and nor do I think that he should be. There's a couple of reasons. I think his job is right now directly tied to David Griffin's, and I think both of the people like their jobs, and I don't think David Griffin will get another opportunity to hire another head coach. It should Willie Green not work out, and two, like I wouldn't agree with giving up on Willie Green without at least giving him healthy star players. And to say that, oh, you're unable to win with an incomplete roster. Okay, well, there's just not going to be many coaches who are going to win at a high clip, right? I think there's a lot of mutual understanding amongst us regarding that, but obviously we think that there's things that can be better, that some change that they leave on the table, and I'm optimistic that they will get better as he grows as a coach and they get a better staff. I think those things you'll see to start to correct themselves.
Happened with Monty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the boring answer I'll give a point on the Warriors game, not to have too big of a coaching discussion, but like, I think the issue with the fans are there are 5 coaches in the NBA that probably positively affect your team. There's 5 coaches in the NBA that negatively affect your team. And it's kind of a wash for the rest of the 20. It goes based on sort of as the health of the team goes and as the talent of the team is constructed. And we have one of the guys who is sitting somewhere between 6 and 24. And I think that frustrates people because it does mean that your coach can't affect the game, meaning he can't make your team better, which is frustrating, or you don't have a scapegoat necessarily for when your team's losing. And so I think that the reason we have lost or are losing is probably a multitude of about 10 or 15 factors: health, coaching, schemes, whatever. And so I think that it is frustrating when you can't necessarily point to your coach and be like, fix it, or we are going to fix this situation by getting you out of there. It's just you got to pull more levers than that. But one thing I think, like specifically getting back to the JV point, is that they should be able to see and improve is like, so you have a guy who is known as a mashing center. He is a guy who dominates against bad teams because young big men just have no business guarding him. I mean, even a good big man like Nick Richards or somebody like any of the Houston center, like they are getting absolutely worked on the offensive glass and in the paint, or on the glass and in the paint by JV. I don't really know how they can't see. Not only will you not have him exposed as much in a pick and roll offense or having to just switch out of position when the ball is in motion with a lot of these starting units and they're good point guards and good shooters, and you're not going to maximize them as much on offense because you're typically going to have some of your better defensive centers in there or defensive power forwards that can match up against them. And so I think that like you are hurting yourself with JV on the offensive and the defensive side of the ball. And those are just like little things that last night JV was gassed at the end of the third quarter. You don't get a sub for him. They end up getting 3 offensive rebounds and missed wide open 3. Steph drains a 3. It's like they're only shooting 33% from 3 on that possession, but it's like you only need 1 to end the possession. And so it's just little things like that, I think, that like our coaches, and I don't know if there's a Willie thing or who else, but it's just like it's a half step too late. Like it's a half rotation too late. It is a 3 minutes of Tony Snell in an elimination game type move that it's just like, I don't know where these things come from, but it is sort of like, I'm sitting on the couch. I think that's an insane move. I don't know how none of the 6 coaches next to you are saying that's an insane move.
It's interesting because it is a staff thing, right? I think like they delegate responsibilities out, and the general shape of the rotation is delegated to an assistant coach. And I believe in this case, it's Jerron Collins, who is someone Willie hired from Golden State. But I do think Willie, on a game-to-game basis or in a moment basis, like can make the snap decision of this is what I want, this is who I want, and we've seen that, aka Tony Snell. But
who would be like the 4th best shooter on the Pelicans this year? So
yeah, I mean, they could use some Tony Snell, I guess. But no, what's interesting is that you talk about like pulling levers, and I think the one area that this staff doesn't get credit for, and they've consistently done, is no matter who's out there, they've been able to put out good defensive lineups. And the only time that this team doesn't play good defense, well, I don't say the only time, but the majority of the time, if they're not playing good defense, is because their offense is terrible. Right? They're at the mercy of missed shots and turnovers, and so they're constantly in transition and unable to defend in the half court. But if those shots are going in, or if there's dead ball turnovers, their half court defense has been good all year, regardless of the personnel, regardless of who's been in or out. Their worst on court defensive guy, I believe CJ holds the rating as the worst on court defensive player for the Pelicans. Like, it's like 113 or something, which would be like 11th best defense in the league. If that was like the team's overall, like, and so even their worst guys are like, oh, the defense is pretty good when they're on the court. They're not like hemorrhaging points. So that brings up, that's actually, like, I've thought about this recently. It's like they've drafted all these like defensive oriented players with the hope that, oh, we got Fred Vincent, we're going to teach him how to shoot, and we can always teach him how to play offense. Defense is the toughest part. Maybe they should change their draft philosophy, right? It certainly seems like of the players they've drafted, Trey's made more strides on defense than anybody else has made on offense. And so it's like, okay, if you have a coach and a staff that is able to coach up players to at least play good rotational defense. I mean, I think individual defense will always be a mixture of skill and desire. Just wanting the ball. We know some guys just want it more than others, but I think the vast majority, like the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile, like everyone who falls in the middle of that's bell curve, they can probably be taught to play good schematic defense, and they can fit in if you have decent personnel around them. And maybe that's just a way the Pelicans need to go, is get more offensive oriented players, trust that Willie Green will shape them up in the defensive players, or they're just not going to play.
Again, I know the offensive talent was absurd, but the defensive rating for those Kyrie, KD, Harden Nets was like a solid, not only an absurd offense, but it wasn't just outscoring people in track meets. Like it really is. If you can set your defense and you can dominate on offense, then like it isn't as hard, I think, as people say to score in the or to stop in the half court. Just because when offenses slow down, all numbers point to it's just harder to score in the half court if you have 5 human NBA defenders there trying to, like, with some reason of cohesion, stop you. And so, like, I do, because I was even in a discussion today with somebody about Dyson, where it was like, you are who you can guard in the NBA, and you can't really teach the defensive instincts, but through reps and scheme and coaching, you can probably get Dyson a lot more comfortable on offense. And even 4 hours after that discussion, I'm wondering what you are is, well, shit, maybe do you need to take the guy who is the opposite side of the coin of Dyson offensively, and then you just figure out the defensive side of the things, because you can't teach the ability that Trey does, where you have a guy who is confident spacing the floor from literally 29 feet.
Yeah, like, Trey coming out of UVA was 6'9", athletic, and he was a good college defender. And it's expected for young players to take some time to put it together, defensively. But you're like, all right, he's got the tools, he's athletic, so can we get him in our system and teach him how to do that? Rather than, we've got this toolsy player, can we get him with our staff, and all of a sudden he's a productive offensive player? And I think maybe they're figuring out that one's an easier bet than the other. But we'll see. The sample is still tiny, when it comes to them developing these players. The interesting thing, Andrew Lopez just tweeted out, the Pelicans have yet to file their injury report, but Denver is listing Jokic as questionable on the report. Now, we know if the Pelicans listed someone as questionable, it's just as good as listing them out, but I don't know what that means for the Nuggets. Also on their injury list is Blato Conchar and Peyton Watson are listed as questionable, and then Colin Gillespie and Jack White are listed as out, which I don't think they've ever played against the Pelicans. But Conchar has, and Conchar was the victim of some nice Trey Murphy dunks when they played in New Orleans. And if Jokic is out, that's huge. I mean, that's potentially another JV game.
Yeah, that was all I asked must have been, it was after the Rockets loss. I was dumb. I was like, I'm going to be irrationally confident, illogically confident about the New Orleans Pelicans now. And what it really was coming down to was, at some point, we got to have some 3-point shooting variance luck and some sort of injury report luck. And that was all I was looking for down, because when it's like over the course of the season, these things will shake out over like 7 or 8 games. If you can get enough either hot shooting from your team, cold shooting from the other team, or other team resting players, like the Clippers will be on a back-to-back from Memphis when they play us. When we go to Minnesota for the last game, they'll be in San Antonio the night before. And so, like, those are some things that, like, if we can just, like, pull the levers on the right matchups and the right injury reports, like, we might be able to sneak into the right part of the play-in. And again, this all just could be us losing to Dallas in the play-in, but it also, like, you get into the playoffs and you buy yourself 2 more weeks. We'll see.
Yeah. So I guess speaking of the playoffs a little bit, actually, before we get there, there's one thing I wanted to bring up. Andrew Lopez was on a podcast with Brian Windhorst, and they're kind of talking about the Pelicans. And one little bit of information that came out of that podcast is when the Pelicans lost at home to the Lakers in the fashion they did, there was a little bit of a meeting that occurred. I think from what I've heard, and there was not just that meeting, but one meeting that did occur was Willie Green meeting with Larry Nance Jr., CJ McCollum, and Garrett Temple, bringing back the Jim Boylan Leadership Council, baby, the adults in the room. So I really wanted to just ask y'all about what you thought about those 3 being the people that Willie went to just kind of, like, I guess, catalyze some change or whatnot. I have some things that I'd like I've heard behind the scenes that I'd like to fill in at some point. But just wanted to get your thoughts on that stuff.
So there are 3 of this is the quintessential Pelicans experience, because they're 3 of the 4 oldest players on the team. who's the one that did not get included of the 4 oldest players in the team? The same guy who wasn't getting included in anything throughout the season, Jonas.
JV, yeah.
Yes. And so he can't get involved in the Pelicans' game plan. He can't even get involved in the players that the elder statesman meeting. All the 30-plus-year-olds, but him, are included in this meeting with Willie. And so it's just of course. So I have no idea what could possibly be like the outcome of the meeting that involves those guys without BI or with like any like I don't know. It's just like I get that you want to have a vet discussion, but like a vet discussion that's that exclusive, it includes Garrett Temple, who's the human victory scar of the Pelicans this year. Like I don't know, just strange.
I gotta personally, I think it's a nothing burger because I love CJ, but I think CJ loves to inflate CJ's importance to his team, the league, his winery, whatever it is. CJ, I think, has to be in the conversation for things, and I think that that's great because having a guy advocate for us in the media and on TV and throughout the Players Association is very, very necessary. But I think I look at this as more of a reflection upon the guys who are on the leadership council wanting to probably form that themselves. And I think that a guy like Larry has come out and said that he's really wanted to find a home somewhere. He's moved around a lot. He's wanted a spot in a rotation. He's wanted to close games. He's wanted a good community. Garrett Temple, he's from here. He has he's always connected with the state of Louisiana. He's the oldest person on the team. He's basically a coach. CJ, I think like I just said, somebody who wants to be involved, came here because he felt like he could help sort of mold this team around him and that the team needed his leadership. But I think that this is more of a reflection on these guys trying to take it upon themselves to provide value to the team and to provide leadership to the team. Because I think for the most part, LeBron is probably an exceptional case where he is the everything. He is the alpha, the leader, the best player. I think on a lot of teams, you probably do end up with these vets who aren't the guys where the buck stops on the court with them. They're not going to also be the liaisons between the coach and stuff. And so I from that perspective, it doesn't really concern me all that much because I think from Zion and BI, it's y'all are the best players on the team. Just go fucking play. Just go. Your job to this team is to be an all-star level player. CJ, I legitimately think his job is not just to be whatever the 50th, 45th best player in the NBA. It's to lead this team, to advocate for this team, to do all of this. And so I look at it more as those guys trying to I don't want to say inflate their roles, but provide value as opposed to our team being who do we pull and include when we really got to get stuff going here.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Would you say that's more of a, instead of a council, it's like a junta, like a leadership junta? They kind of took it.
I think so. And the funny part is all the Willie Green detractors would be like, why do you take the players coming after you to go do all that stuff? And so it's I think it's ultimately a lose-lose situation when you have to call a players only or a leadership council type meeting. It means something's not going right. But I don't mind call it separation of church and state if church is the people coaching the team and state is the people actually playing in the games.
Yeah, no, you need that kind of delineation for sure. I don't. Look, I like you said, I think it's mostly a nothing burger. I think it would have been top tier content if Josh Richardson was also part of that leadership council. But maybe he was. Maybe they just left that one out. But no, from what I gather is that they had that meeting, and then there was a separate players only meeting that occurred, and in that meeting, I think Chris Haynes kind of spoke on it last night on the broadcast. Is Zion tried to bring the team together, and Zion's message, from what I gather, was basically hey, it's all right, let's shake this off, let's come together, let's take care of business. If we can hold down the fort, I'm doing my best to get back on the court, and let's do that, and then let's go compete for the playoffs. And I don't think it was the most well-received message I think guys were just like at their lowest point at the moment, and it was kind of like, well, believe it when we see it, right? Um, and I think it sucks because I think it seems like Zion certainly wants to be a guy who has a voice on the team, but it's very hard to do if you're constantly sidelined. It's just you can't talk the talk and walk the walk. But we've also seen that when he's healthy, how the team galvanizes around him, and we've seen that he's a magnetic personality. It's just very tough to hear that from someone who's been out for that long when you've just lost like one of the most embarrassing games of your season, right? But they did have that players only meeting, and from my understanding, there was some front office pressure involved too to get things changed. There was like a lot of ideas on the table, ideas that we've talked about in terms of like, hey, they should use certain guys differently. They should maybe go away from this stuff and perhaps emphasize some other stuff. And there was some front office pressure involved there too. And whatever it was, they came out in that first Rockets game. They looked different. They played a little bit different. Obviously, they didn't win, but then they did all the 5-game winning streak stuff. So that it seemed like there was a change that occurred and people got on the same page. I'm optimistic it'll continue a little bit into this Nuggets game and hopefully the Clippers game at home. But going back to leadership junta for a second, I do think that like for those specific, for Larry and CJ, I think Temple as well. Like Temple was part of that initial sign and trade, to be like a human salary exception because he had this non-guaranteed year coming up and they can use it if they want to, and to include as part of a trade, but B, to really be this voice. And I don't think anyone expected he would play as many minutes as he did last year, but he ended up doing so because I guess he has Willie Green's ear, as we now know. And with Larry and CJ, they were also specifically brought in to be the adults. And I think that was how the trade was marketed, but it was also like how it's internally marketed as well. And that's kind of like the implicit agreement, like where we brought you guys in, we're giving you this platform. We want to get Z on board, right? We want because that was what they were dealing with last year, right? The whole Zion stuff, and we want buy-in from all of our players, and to their credit, they did that, right? They did their job. They were rewarded with handsome extensions because they did their job, and that sort of continued. And I think the one area where it cuts them that is Larry and CJ have a certain vision for the team, right? Their vision of the team, and like you said, Andrew, CJ likes to emphasize the importance of CJ, and
it's CJ time. CJ,
the lead guard time,
Yeah.
And so like he's like, I'm not saying these are the exact conversations that happened or anything, but this is pure speculation on my part. But in my opinion, it's CJ telling Willie like, hey, I'm your point guard, right? Like, let me be your point guard. Let me be your voice on the court. I'll do that. Let's run things this way. Oh, I'm the point guard. I feel comfortable playing with a guy like Larry, right? And Larry's like, every chance he's gotten, we could also be team 6'9". We got a bunch of switchable 6'7", 6'8", 6'9" people. We could beat Toronto. Like, and meanwhile, Toronto was just dog water. Like they weren't any good the whole year until they traded for Pirtle, the big man. But I think they had like a certain vision of how they wanted to play, which was like, we're going to do this fun small ball stuff. We're going to be this like Rockets-y, Warriors-y type team. Not exactly the Warriors in terms of the movement, closer to the Rockets. So we're going to be like James Harden iso ball type stuff, but switch everything. And I think that had undue influence on Willie and the coaching staff, and was largely, I don't want to say like the reason why we saw the deprioritizing of JV and some of the other stuff, but like I think was a heavy contributor in what we saw the team, at least its offensive philosophy and its philosophy as a whole throughout the year.
It's you guys talking about like CJ wanting to stress the importance of CJ. Doesn't it make you think back to, remember when he got here, there was so much made of the, CJ or Zion didn't reach out to CJ. And so it's like, how much of that is just like maybe a little bit more ego than we initially got. Like it was more, it was at the time, it was an indictment on Zion because like he's not playing and he's like not engaged with the team. Right. And it's like, oh no, what's going on with him? But given all we know now over the last year or so, maybe CJ just had his feelings hurt, man.
Yeah, look, I'm grateful for what CJ's done
For sure,
in terms
for
of
sure.
like bringing a level of professionalism both publicly and privately to the team. Like, I think he's done way more good than harm, and I think just what he was able to do in terms of like reshaping the team's image. I don't want to like credit just solely to CJ, but in terms of like what they were able to accomplish last year, like to me, that was the price of the extension. Like that is what you paid for. It's like cool, that I'm fine because now you have a Z who's locked in for 5 years and he wants to be a part of a good team, and now he was a part of a good team this year and has tasted that, and so like you can't put a price on that.
No.
But,
And I
but
think
yeah, you're right that like it seems like he likes hearing his own voice.
I think we renormalize. I mean, I have this theory in life, but much more than just basketball. But like, I think humans are very, very easy to renormalize things without necessarily realizing how quickly that they've renormalized their surroundings. And I mean, just if you take the Pelican situation now, through 40 games, we have renormalized that we are a team that deserves to be in the Western Conference. And you look back now, and this is a team 1 year ago that we were very concerned whether Zion wanted to even be here or not. And now we're concerned whether he's the guy who should be making the guys, we got to fucking fight speech in the locker room. And so it's like, it sucks that both of them still occur while he's injured. But I mean, if you're going to have a guy who's disengaged while he's injured or a guy who is too engaged and the team almost is like, we'll get back healthy, I would rather have the second one. And so like, I do think that like CJ has changed things. And I said this a while ago. It's like, I'm done criticizing the guy who's asked to come here as a 2B and has been almost tasked with being a number one option for over 100 games. And so it's just like, I can no longer get upset at a guy who has done everything that he has promised in terms of making the playoffs and bringing professionalism and trying to give an identity, but come up short on like not being Damian Lillard, I guess, because I think that that's sort of what it would require for us to like sustain our production with the level of injuries we've had relative to CJ's health.
Yeah, sure.
Well said. Completely agree on that. Yeah, so I thought that leadership thing was a little interesting. I think we've covered a good bit. So before we go out, I just want to look ahead. So we talked about Denver. We talked about after Denver, they have a 4-game home stretch. It's the Clippers, it's Sacramento, Memphis. That's a back-to-back, and then New York. So none of those teams, actually none of these 5 teams, including Denver, are easy. I guess 6. You can include Minnesota as well, right? All 6 teams to close out the season are playoff hopefuls, playoff viables. You kind of hope that like one of Sacramento or Memphis have locked in their seeding by the time they play them. And those games are maybe of less consequence to those teams, but obviously that's not something you can plan for. There is a significant gap. So like they play the Clippers on the 1st, and then they don't play again. That's Saturday, and they don't play again until Tuesday, right? So you have Sunday and Monday where you're like, maybe can you get Z a practice? And if you're not, and since the Kings game is a back-to-back with Memphis, and it's a home back-to-back, so maybe you're like, all right, like maybe you don't play him the Kings game. Is Memphis the game that Z comes back? That's what I'm looking at. I guess, how do y'all feel about this home stretch coming up? And I can start with Andrew and go to Mason.
Yeah, you kind of hit it. I was anticipating, let's call it before the last update, even my most optimistic was like, all right, 4 games is what I always said, and then looked at the schedule and was like, okay, well, one of them is a back-to-back, so play one of the Sacramento, Memphis ones, and then the last 2. And I think at this point right now, I would be, if things continue on this trajectory, I'll call it the Chris Haynes trajectory, because I don't think anything he broke last night was news. I think that it like confirmed what a lot of people thought, just in terms about like, had he not had another setback and was just generally progressing. And so I think that like we will, if I had to bet, we would see, that is DraftKings.com/use code boot if you're going to bet on this. So if I had to bet, what I would say is that we get some sort of ominous positive announcement that he has like done 5-on-5 work, on the injury report is doubtful or questionable, or had like a very positive practice in somewhere around the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday sort of Kings game, whatever. And then he actually ends up playing Friday. And so I think that like if we had to actually see it, we'll see him Friday in bursts. We'll see him against Minnesota in bursts, and then we just figure out what the play-in is. That is like if I'm putting money on the table, we actually do, which is kind of crazy still. I know that he hasn't played a lot, but it's like that is Zion Williamson coming back this year. I do think that there is one part of my brain where it's like, well, he's dead. He's never playing again, yada, yada, yada. But actually, like, he could legitimately be back on the court in 8 or 7 to 9 days.
Yeah, just like my non-express shipping.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm less interested in speculating. I'm just giving up on any sort of like be able to guess at all about when Zion's coming back. I think I'm more interested in kind of picking apart the remaining games and who they're playing, because this is it, as always happens. This comes down to who you get on what night, and like both. So you mentioned, Schmidt, the Grizzlies and the Kings, two teams that, if you take what the Grizzlies are doing for the Clippers game as any indication, it looks like they're going to rest everybody. They're 3 games back of the Nuggets, and they're 3 games up on Sacramento. I really feel like the top 3 seeds are kind of just like, this is where we're going to be. And the Kings and Grizzlies both have back-to-backs involving the Pelicans games. And so I think that there's so much really rides on what those teams decide to do, right? It's crazy. But like if I had to bet, again, use the DraftKings promo code BOOT, I think
degenerate gamblers here.
I think we get the Grizzlies B squad. So they play Portland the night before at home, and then they go to New Orleans. I think they'll play their guys against the team that's like, I feel like they'll rather play a home game and play their guys at home and then sit the road back to back, even though that's like the more competitive game. I kind of expect that to happen, and the Pelicans get the Grizzlies B squad. The Kings are a different story. They go to New Orleans, and they go to Dallas the very next night. I kind of believe that the Kings will play their guys against. I think Kings play their guys against New Orleans. They rest against the Mavericks. They play their guys against the Warriors. They rest against the Nuggets, and like that ends their season. And so like that kind of makes sense to me. So I feel like we'll get the Kings A squad and we'll get the Grizzlies B squad, and I kind of like it that way. Like I think the Pelicans do well against crap defenses, and the Kings have an incredible offense, one of the best in league history really this year. But I like their chances against the Kings more than the Grizzlies in just a 1-game situation. So you've got those 2 games, and then obviously, and then they end with the Knicks at home, who they're in a interesting situation on their own. Like they're pretty much locked into the 5 seed. That's their last. I don't know. I haven't looked. What's the Knicks' final schedule after? So after they play the Pelicans, they're at home against the Pacers. I don't know. Like
the Pacers are tanking right now.
Yeah, and so like, I really, that's going to be really interesting, because on one hand, it's you don't really want to play all your starters in the last game of the season, right? Like that's you want to kind of rest up for the playoffs. But on the other hand, like, do you really want to like end with your players playing a game on the road and then go home and just sit everyone? I don't know. So I kind of tend to expect that the Knicks do play their guys against New Orleans, and also it's Tibbs. Tibbs will probably play his guys all 82.
Well, that's what I was going to say about Sacramento. Is I think they're young enough, and I think they're just like running off this high of like their best season. I think they're just going to continue to try to like have the best season possible. And they're the one team that's like in the West that's been good on the road. They have a winning record on the road. So like I think Sacramento, like I would be surprised if they like seriously rested a lot of their players even to close out the year. I think they're just going to keep doing what they do. But the Memphis one is interesting because Memphis is not a good road team as well. And so maybe that's just something they want to punt. The one question I have for y'all is, do Sacramento and Memphis, do they look at New Orleans as like, okay, they could possibly end up in our bracket, rather play them than the Lakers? Are teams going to do any kind of gamesmanship?
Or the Mavs too, because that's the literal back-to-back.
Do any kind of gamesmanship to avoid other opponents than New Orleans?
I would say the opposite indicative on how people treat us as tune-up games to get their stars back versus their actual like road trip. Like every team's star comes back against us because it's like, well, I could probably, or the Warriors theory of we're just going to sit everybody against New Orleans, maybe pick up a win against them, and then go start and play everybody actually against Dallas or Memphis, whoever's on our actual road trip.
Right.
So I don't think so. I think people view us as food, especially without Zion.
I still buy that the Kings sit one of the Dallas New Orleans games. The Kings sit there because like it's a back-to-back at the end of the season. Why would you risk it? But yeah. Other than that, I think they'll play every other game out.
Yep. We'll see. We'll see how the Pelicans handle this home stretch. It's going to be key for them. The Lakers have a road-heavy stretch coming up, starting in Chicago. 5-game road trip: Chicago, Minnesota, Houston, Utah. And I guess the Clippers is not really a road trip.
Must be nice.
Must be nice. But yeah, that's something.
Is Utah done? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go for it.
Do you view Utah as done? Like I think one team's going to get left out. We think. I
think they're resting players enough to where they're done. I think Danny Ainge is like, yeah, I've seen enough.
The Thunder thing is weird to me. I feel like because OKC has a really soft schedule to close out, but then Shea keeps resting. So I really thought that they had a good chance to make the play-in, but I don't know if I guess they still do because they're playing a bunch of bad teams to close out. But not that the Charlotte game helped them, but still, just
I love how in Tankathon, if you look at the schedule, the L's are in green and the wins are in red.
It really is
jarring to see. Yeah. Well, anyways, this podcast was sponsored by DraftKings Sportsbook. So if you're ready for underdogs, upset, and unbelievable action from DraftKings Sportsbook, the biggest tournament in college basketball is here. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 on college hoops and get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Plus, for a limited time, all customers can score on a no-sweat bet during round 1 and 2 of the tournament, which I think is over. Goes to the app, opt in, hit, place a no sweat bet, and if it doesn't hit, you'll get a bonus bet to back up to $10. And yeah, I'm sad that Alabama got knocked out, but still, we'll see how the finals shake out. Download DraftKings Sportsbook now and sign up with promo code BOOT, BOOT. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets instantly, win or lose, only at DraftKings Sportsbook with the code BOOT. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details. Andrew, my man, thanks for joining us. Mason, likewise, it was a pleasure. Glad we were able to get on this, and hopefully the Pelicans bring us a lot of good news to talk about in the next few days. Appreciate you.
It's going to be fun. Appreciate y'all.